At my son's wedding, his wife whispered in my ear, "You won't be around much longer, old woman." But what happened next would shock everyone, including me. I pulled up to Malcolm and Denise's house in my old Buick, the same car I'd driven for 15 years. In my lap sat my famous cornbread, wrapped in my late husband's favorite serving dish, the one he'd bought me for our 25th anniversary. The dish was chipped now, but I couldn't bear to throw it away. As I walked up the driveway, I noticed Denise watching me through the window. Her eyes followed that serving dish with a look I couldn't quite place, not hunger, not appreciation, but something else entirely. Something that made my skin crawl. "Grandma." Jordan came running out to meet me, his 12-year-old face beaming. "You brought your cornbread. Mom's been talking about it all week." But when I looked back at the window, Denise was gone. And that feeling in my stomach? It stayed. The dining room was set like a magazine spread, fine china, crystal glasses, everything polished to perfection. Denise sat at the head of the table like a queen, her designer dress catching the light. Malcolm poured wine, laughing louder than necessary, his eyes avoiding mine. I took my usual seat at the end of the table, the one farthest from everyone else. My plate looked different from the others. The chicken leg was darker, the greens swimming in more juice. But I told myself I was imagining things. "Clara," Denise said, her voice sweet as honey, "that serving dish has such character. Where did you get it?" "From my late husband," I answered. "He bought it for our anniversary." "Oh, how sentimental." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Malcolm, darling, don't forget to serve your mother." But Malcolm was already serving everyone else, his movements hurried, his eyes still avoiding mine. The conversation flowed around me like water around a rock, and I realized I'd become invisible in my own family. Halfway through dinner, Jordan leaned close to me, pretending to give me a hug. I felt something slip into my palm, a folded piece of paper. "Grandma," he whispered, "don't eat the food." My heart stopped. I looked into his eyes, wide, scared, begging me to trust him. I opened the paper under the table. "Don't eat the food." I heard them talking. "They're trying to make you sick." The room spun around me. Denise was laughing at something Malcolm said, her wine glass raised in a toast. Malcolm was cutting his chicken, completely focused on his plate. And Jordan was squeezing my hand under the table, his small fingers trembling. I thought of all the times I'd sacrificed for this family, the 2 jobs, the sleepless nights, the clothes I'd gone without. And now they wanted to poison me? I couldn't accuse them without proof. I couldn't leave abruptly without showing fear. So I did what any woman who's learned survival would do. I played their game. While Denise was distracted, telling some story about her latest shopping trip, I slid my plate gently toward her side of the table, replacing it with hers. The movement was so smooth, so practiced, that no one noticed. When she turned back, she ate without hesitation. Fork to mouth, sip of wine, another bite. She was so confident in her plan that she didn't even check her plate. Minutes later, Denise pressed a hand to her chest, then her throat. "Something doesn't feel right," she gasped. The room erupted into chaos. Malcolm rushed to her side, shouting for someone to call 911. The children screamed. I stayed seated, my hands steady, though inside my pulse raced like thunder. Jordan squeezed my hand under the table, and we both knew, what had just happened. As the ambulance pulled away, Malcolm turned to me, his face pale with shock. "Mom, what happened? Did you see anything?" I looked him straight in the eye, the son I'd raised, the boy I'd worked 2 jobs to send to college. "I saw everything," I said quietly. His face changed then, something shifting behind his eyes. Fear? Guilt? I couldn't tell. Jordan stood beside me, his small hand in mine, and I realized something that would change everything. I wasn't alone anymore. Little did I know that this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would tear my family apart. Because when I got home that night, I found something that would shatter my world. For 71 years, I was the backbone nobody noticed until they tried to erase me. But let me tell you about the woman I used to be. I was 23 when I married Robert. We had dreams, big dreams. A house with a white picket fence, children who would never know hunger, a life built on love and hard work. Robert worked construction by day, I cleaned houses by night. We saved every penny, dreamed every dream. When Robert died of a heart attack at 45, I was left with 3 children and a mortgage I couldn't afford. But I didn't break. I couldn't break. I took a second job at the textile factory, working 16-hour days, coming home to cook dinner, help with homework, tuck my babies into bed. Malcolm was my oldest, my only son. When he got accepted to college, I sold my wedding ring to pay the first semester's tuition. I wore the same 3 dresses for 5 years, so he could have new clothes. I ate beans and rice for months so he could have steak on his birthday. But now, sitting in my empty house after that dinner, I realized something that would change everything. I had become the woman behind the curtains, the one who held everything together but was never seen. The house was quiet now, too quiet. Robert's picture sat on my dresser, his kind eyes watching me from the frame. I touched the worn wood of his toolbox in the garage, the one he'd used to build this house with his own hands. Every nail, every board, every memory was here. But Malcolm? He'd stopped coming by months ago. When he did visit, it was always with Denise, always with an agenda. Mom, we need to talk about the house. Mom, you should consider moving somewhere easier. Mom, Denise thinks you're getting forgetful. Forgetful. The word stung like a slap. I'd raised 3 children alone, worked 2 jobs, kept this house running for 30 years. But now I was forgetful because I couldn't remember where I'd put my reading glasses. I thought about all the times I'd gone without so my children could have more. The winter, I wore the same coat for 3 years because Malcolm needed a new jacket. The summer, I worked overtime to pay for Yvonne's prom dress, while I wore the same church dress I'd had for 5 years. The Christmas, I gave everyone presents but myself, because there wasn't enough money left. I remembered the day Malcolm graduated from college, how proud I'd been, how I'd sat in the audience with tears streaming down my face. He'd looked so handsome in his cap and gown, so grown up. When he'd walked across that stage, I'd thought all my sacrifices had been worth it. But now? Now I wondered if he even remembered those sacrifices. If he remembered the woman who'd worked herself to the bone so he could have a better life. If he remembered the mother who'd loved him unconditionally, who'd given him everything she had. I walked through my house, touching the memories that lived in every corner. The kitchen where I'd cooked thousands of meals, the living room where I'd read bedtime stories, the bedroom where I'd cried alone after Robert died. This house was my life, my history, my everything. But to Malcolm and Denise, it was just property. Just an asset to be managed, a burden to be handled. They didn't see the love in these walls, the memories in these rooms. They didn't see me. I was the woman behind the curtains, the one who made everything work but was never acknowledged, the one who gave everything but received nothing in return, the one who was invisible in her own family. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to be invisible anymore. I wasn't going to be the woman behind the curtains. I was going to fight back. I picked up the phone and called my old friend, Pastor Williams. He'd known Robert, had officiated at our wedding. He'd watched me raise my children, had seen the sacrifices I'd made. Pastor, I said, my voice steady, I need your help. Something's happening in my family, and I don't know who else to turn to. What happened next would shock everyone. Because when I opened my door the next morning, I found something that would destroy everything I'd built. When Malcolm married Denise, I didn't just lose a son. I lost my place in my own family. But what happened next would shock even me. I remember the first time I met Denise. She'd arrived in a silver BMW, her designer clothes catching the light, her expensive perfume filling the room. She'd looked at my house with those cold eyes, taking in every detail, every flaw. "Oh, Clara," she'd said, her voice sweet as poison. "What a charming home. So authentic." Authentic. The word stung like a slap. My house, the one Robert had built with his own hands, the one where I'd raised my children, was just authentic to her. A curiosity, a relic from another time. Malcolm had been different then, too. He'd stood beside her, nodding at everything she said, agreeing with every judgment she made. The son I'd raised, the boy who'd once helped me in the kitchen, who'd once asked me to read him bedtime stories, was gone. In his place was a stranger who looked at me with pity in his eyes. It started small, those little cuts that bleed you dry. "Oh, Clara, you still cook with lard? No wonder your generation had high blood pressure." Or when she'd see me in church clothes I'd had for years. "That dress has character. But for the wedding, maybe something less humble." Her words always had that sugary coating, but the sting underneath never missed me. She'd smile while she insulted me, laugh while she cut me down. "And Malcolm?" He'd started echoing her tone, repeating her judgments, making me feel small in my own home. "Mom," he'd say, "Denise is just trying to help. Modernize things a bit. Make life easier for you." Easier. The word made me want to scream. I'd worked 2 jobs, raised 3 children, kept this house running for 30 years. But now I needed help? Now I needed to be modernized. Family gatherings became torture. Conversations would hush when I entered the room, as if I'd interrupted something important. My opinions were brushed off as out of touch, my stories dismissed as old-fashioned. Plates would skip past me at the dinner table, and I'd have to remind someone, "Don't forget Grandma." Denise would sit at the head of the table like a queen, directing conversations, controlling the flow of the evening. Malcolm would hang on her every word, laughing at her jokes, agreeing with her opinions. And I'd sit at the end of the table, invisible, forgotten, erased. But Jordan? He'd sneak into my kitchen to eat my cornbread, ask for stories about the old days. When others rolled their eyes at me, Jordan would squeeze my hand under the table, reminding me that I wasn't completely alone. The worst part was the cultural clash. Denise came from money, from a world where everything was polished and perfect. She didn't understand the value of hard work, the beauty of simple things, the strength that comes from struggle. "Clara," she'd say, "why don't you just hire someone to clean? You're too old for this kind of work." Too old. The words cut deep. I'd been cleaning houses since I was 16, had worked harder than most people ever would. But to her, I was just old, just a burden, just someone to be managed. Malcolm had started talking about investments and the house, my house, as if it were already his. As if I were already gone, already forgotten, already erased. The breaking point came during a family dinner. Denise had made some fancy dish that looked beautiful but tasted like nothing. I'd brought my traditional collard greens, the ones my mother had taught me to make, the ones that tasted like home. "Oh, Clara," Denise had said, wrinkling her nose, "that's so heavy. Don't you think we should try something lighter? More modern?" Modern. The word that would destroy everything. Because to her I wasn't modern. I wasn't relevant. I wasn't important. Malcolm had nodded, agreeing with her, choosing her over me. And in that moment, I realized something that would change everything. I had lost my son. Not to death, but to something worse. To a woman who saw me as a problem to be solved, a burden to be managed, a life to be erased. The truth was about to be revealed. Because when I got home that night, I found something that would change my life forever. 6 months before that dinner, I started noticing things that made my stomach turn, but when I told my son, he said I was getting forgetful. I came home from church that Sunday feeling peaceful, refreshed. I'd worn my good dress, the one I'd had for 5 years, but still looked presentable. I'd sat in my usual pew, listened to Pastor Williams's sermon about family and forgiveness, and I'd felt hopeful. But when I walked into my kitchen, something was wrong. My pill bottles, which I always kept in the cabinet above the sink, were sitting on the counter. Not scattered, not messy, but placed there deliberately, as if someone had been looking at them. I stood there, staring at those bottles, my heart racing. I was sure I'd put them away before I left. I always put them away. It was part of my routine, like brushing my teeth or saying my prayers. I called Malcolm that night, my voice shaking. "Son, I think someone's been in my house." "Mom," he said, his voice patient but dismissive, "you're getting forgetful. You probably just forgot where you put them." But I hadn't forgotten. I knew I hadn't forgotten. A week later, I came home from the grocery store to find Denise in my living room. She was on the phone, her voice low and urgent, and when she saw me, she quickly slipped something into her purse. "Oh, Clara," she said, her smile too bright. "I was just checking on you, making sure you were okay." But I'd seen the papers, the documents she'd been looking at. They'd looked official, legal, with stamps and signatures. And the way she'd hidden them? That wasn't checking on me. That was something else entirely. "Denise," I said, my voice steady, "what were you looking at?" "Nothing important," she said, her eyes avoiding mine. "Just some paperwork. Malcolm asked me to help organize things." Organize things. The words made my skin crawl. What things? What was there to organize in my house that required legal documents? The next week, Malcolm came to visit. He was wearing his good suit, the one he wore to work, and he seemed nervous, distracted. When he took off his coat, a business card fell from his pocket. I picked it up, my hands trembling. The words stared back at me. Estate planning. Elder care services. Power of attorney. Power of attorney. The words that would change everything. Because I knew what that meant. It meant Malcolm wanted control over my life, my decisions, my everything. "Son," I said, holding up the card, "what is this?" His face went pale. "Mom, it's nothing. Just planning ahead. For when you get older." When I get older. I was 71 years old. How much older did I need to be? That night, I lay in bed, listening to the sounds of my house. The creaking of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic. But then I heard something else, voices, low and urgent, coming from the kitchen. I crept down the hallway, my heart pounding, and I heard them. Malcolm and Denise, talking in hushed tones. "If she passes naturally." Denise's voice, cold and calculating. "The deed will transfer cleanly." Malcolm's voice, agreeing with her. "Nobody will suspect." Denise again, her words like ice. I stood there in the darkness, listening to my son and his wife plan my death. Not my care, not my comfort, but my death. As if I were already gone, already forgotten, already erased. I crept back to my room, my hands shaking, my heart breaking. Because in that moment, I realized something that would change everything. My own son wanted me dead. I sat in my bedroom that night, staring at Robert's picture, asking him what I should do. But Robert was gone, And I was alone. Alone with the knowledge that my own family wanted me dead. I thought about all the times I'd sacrificed for them, all the times I'd gone without so they could have more. I thought about the house I'd built with Robert, the memories that lived in every corner, the life I'd created with my own hands. And I realized something that would change everything. I wasn't going to let them take it. I wasn't going to let them erase me. I was going to fight back. My world was about to change. Because when Jordan came to visit the next day, he brought news that would destroy everything I'd built. After Denise collapsed, I knew I had to find out how deep this betrayal went, and I wasn't going to wait for them to try again. But what I discovered would shock even me. I drove home from the hospital that night, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Denise was stable, the doctor said.
Food poisoning, they said.
But I knew the truth. I knew what had really happened. When I walked into my house, it felt different. Empty, cold, dangerous. The walls that had once felt like home now felt like a prison. The memories that had once brought comfort now brought fear. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the empty space where my cornbread had been, and I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. I wasn't going to wait for them to try again. I was going to fight back. I picked up the phone and called my old friend, Attorney Johnson. He'd known Robert, had helped us with the house purchase 30 years ago. He'd watched me raise my children, had seen the sacrifices I'd made. Clara, he said, his voice concerned, "What's wrong?" "Something's happening in my family," I said, my voice steady. "And I need your help." Over the next few days, I began documenting everything. The tampered pill bottles, the lawyer's business card, the overheard conversations. I wrote down every detail, every suspicion, every fear. I took pictures, made copies, created a paper trail that would prove what was happening. But the hardest part was the emotional toll. Every time I wrote down another detail, another betrayal, I felt like I was reliving the pain. The son I'd raised, the boy I'd loved unconditionally, was planning my death. Not my care, not my comfort, but my death. I thought about all the times I'd sacrificed for him, all the times I'd gone without so he could have more. I thought about the house I'd built with Robert, the memories that lived in every corner, the life I'd created with my own hands. And I realized something that would change everything. I wasn't going to let them take it. I wasn't going to let them erase me. I was going to fight back. Attorney Johnson listened to my story, his face growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, he sat back in his chair, shaking his head. "Clara," he said, "this is serious. What you're describing is elder abuse, fraud, and attempted murder. We need to act quickly." He filed the necessary paperwork, contacted the authorities, began building a case that would protect me and expose the truth. But the hardest part was knowing that I was turning in my own son. "Mom," Malcolm had said when I'd confronted him, "you're being paranoid. Denise would never hurt you. We're just trying to help." Help. The word made me want to scream. They weren't trying to help me. They were trying to kill me. The most important piece of evidence came from Jordan. He'd been listening, watching, understanding what was happening long before I did. And when he came forward with his testimony, it changed everything. "Grandma," he said, his voice trembling, "I heard them talking. Mom told Dad to put something in your food. She said it would just make you weak, that nobody would suspect." His words hit me like a physical blow. My own grandson, the only one who'd shown me love, had been protecting me all along. He'd been the one who'd warned me, who'd saved my life. "I didn't know what else to do," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I couldn't let them hurt you. You're the only one who's ever really loved me." In that moment, I realized something that would change everything. I wasn't alone. I had Jordan, and Jordan had me. and together we were going to fight back. As the investigation unfolded, the full scope of the betrayal became clear. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision, a moment of weakness. This was a calculated plan months in the making. Insurance fraud, property theft, attempted murder. Malcolm and Denise had been planning my death for months, researching methods, consulting lawyers, setting up the legal framework for their crime. They'd been patient, methodical, cold-blooded. But they'd made one mistake. They'd underestimated me. They'd thought I was old, forgetful, weak. They'd thought I would just disappear quietly, without a fight. They were wrong. The revelation that would destroy everything was about to come. Because when word spread about what had happened, our small town became a battlefield. When word spread about what happened at that dinner, our small community became a battlefield, and I was caught in the middle. But what happened next would shock everyone. News travels fast in a small town, especially when it involves one of the most respected families in the community. By Sunday morning, everyone at First Baptist Church knew about Denise's food poisoning and my involvement in the incident. I walked into the sanctuary that morning feeling like I was walking into a war zone. The whispers started immediately, the sideways glances, the pitying looks. People who'd known me for 30 years were suddenly treating me differently, as if I'd become someone else overnight. "Clara," Mrs. Johnson said, her voice dripping with false concern, "are you feeling okay? Sometimes when we get older, we can get confused about things."
Confused.
The word stung like a slap. I'd been confused about nothing. I'd been clear-eyed about everything. Pastor Williams approached me after the service, his face concerned. "Clara," he said, "I've been hearing some things. Is everything all right?" But how could I explain? How could I tell him that my own son had tried to kill me? Malcolm and Denise had been busy, spinning their version of events to anyone who would listen. According to them, I was getting forgetful, confused, not myself. They painted me as a senile old woman who'd accidentally poisoned her own daughter-in-law. "Mom's been having trouble remembering things," Malcolm told anyone who would listen. "We've been trying to help, but she's resistant. You know how stubborn she can be." Stubborn. The word made me want to scream. I wasn't stubborn. I was fighting for my life. Denise had been even more clever, playing the victim card with surgical precision. "I'm just worried about Clara," she'd say, her voice trembling with fake concern. "She's not the woman she used to be. We're all just trying to help her." Help. The word that would destroy everything. Because to her I wasn't modern. I wasn't relevant. I wasn't important. The isolation was the worst part. People I'd known for decades began distancing themselves, believing Malcolm's version of events. My church friends stopped calling, stopped visiting, stopped including me in their activities. "Clara," Mrs. Williams said, her voice gentle but distant, "maybe you should consider moving somewhere easier. Somewhere with more support." Support. The word made me want to cry. I'd been supporting myself for 30 years. I'd been supporting my family for 30 years. But now I needed support? I sat in my empty house, surrounded by memories of a life that was slipping away, and I realized something that would change everything. I was losing everything. My family, my community, my reputation, my life. But Jordan? He became my only public defender, speaking up for me when no one else would. He'd stand beside me at church, hold my hand during services, remind everyone that I was still the same woman I'd always been. "Grandma's not confused," he'd say, his voice firm and clear. "Grandma's not forgetful. Grandma's the strongest person I know." His words meant everything to me. In a world that was turning against me, Jordan was my anchor, my truth, my hope. "Jordan," I said one day, "you don't have to defend me. You don't have to put yourself in the middle of this." Grandma, he said, his eyes meeting mine, you're my family. You're the only one who's ever really loved me. I'm not going to let them hurt you. In that moment, I realized something that would change everything. I wasn't alone. I had Jordan, and Jordan had me, and together, we were going to fight back. As the days passed, I began to understand the full scope of what was happening. This wasn't just about my family. This was about my community, my reputation, my entire life. Malcolm and Denise weren't just trying to kill me. They were trying to erase me, but I wasn't going to let them. I wasn't going to disappear quietly, without a fight. I was going to stand up for myself, for my life, for my dignity. I picked up the phone and called Attorney Johnson. I'm ready, I said, my voice steady. I'm ready to fight back. The discovery that would change my life forever was about to be made. Because when the police arrived with a search warrant, I knew the game was over, but I didn't know whose side they were on. When the police arrived at my door with a search warrant, I knew the game was over, but I didn't know whose side they were on. But what they found would shock everyone. The knock on my door came at 7 in the morning, sharp and official. When I opened it, 2 police officers stood there, their faces serious, their badges gleaming in the morning light. Mrs. Clara Jean? One of them said, his voice formal. We have a search warrant for your residence. We need to come in and look around. My heart stopped. A search warrant. In my own home. The place where I'd lived for 30 years, where I'd raised my children, where I'd built my life. Officer, I said, my voice steady. What are you looking for? Evidence, he said, his eyes meeting mine. Evidence of what happened at your son's house. Evidence. The word made my stomach turn, because I knew what they were looking for. They were looking for proof that I'd poisoned Denise, that I'd tried to kill my own daughter-in-law. But I hadn't poisoned Denise. Denise had poisoned me, and now I was going to prove it. The officers moved through my house with methodical precision, examining every detail, documenting every finding. They found the tampered pill bottles, the lawyer's business card, the hidden documents. They found my meticulous records, my detailed notes, my paper trail of evidence. But the most important finding came from the kitchen. The leftover food from that fateful dinner, the evidence that would change everything. Mrs. Clara, one of the officers said, holding up a sample, this food has been tampered with. There are traces of a substance that could cause serious illness. I stood there, staring at the evidence, my heart racing, because I knew what this meant. I knew what this proved. I knew that the truth was finally coming out. The most crucial piece of evidence came from Jordan. He'd been listening, watching, understanding what was happening long before I did. And when he came forward with his testimony, it changed everything. Officer, he said, his voice trembling but clear. I heard them talking. Mom told Dad to put something in Grandma's food. She said it would just make her weak, that nobody would suspect. His words hit the officers like a physical blow. A 12-year-old boy, testifying against his own parents, protecting his grandmother. It was the kind of testimony that juries believed, that judges respected, that changed cases. Jordan, I said, tears streaming down my face, you don't have to do this. You don't have to put yourself in the middle of this. Grandma, he said, his eyes meeting mine, you're my family. You're the only one who's ever really loved me. I'm not going to let them hurt you. The forensic analysis of the leftover food confirmed what we'd suspected all along. The substance found in the food was a slow-acting poison, designed to cause gradual weakness and eventual death. It was the kind of poison that could be passed off as natural causes, as old age, as the inevitable decline of an elderly woman. But the most damning evidence came from the timing. The poison had been added to the food after it was cooked, after it was served, after it was placed on my plate. It was a deliberate act, a calculated attempt to kill me. The officers looked at me with new respect, new understanding. They'd come to my house expecting to find evidence of my guilt, but instead, they'd found evidence of my innocence. They'd found evidence of a crime, but not the crime they'd expected. As the investigation unfolded, the full truth became clear. Malcolm and Denise had been planning my death for months, researching methods, consulting lawyers, setting up the legal framework for their crime. They'd been patient, methodical, cold-blooded. But they'd made one mistake. They'd underestimated me. They'd thought I was old, forgetful, weak. They'd thought I would just disappear quietly, without a fight. They were wrong. The officers left my house that day with evidence that would change everything. Evidence that would protect me, expose the truth, and bring justice to those who'd tried to destroy me. The courthouse would become a battlefield. Because when I faced my son across the courtroom, I knew the real fight was just beginning. At the courthouse, I faced my son across the room, and for the first time in years, he couldn't look me in the eye. But what I said next would shock the entire courtroom. The courthouse was packed that morning, filled with people who'd come to witness the spectacle. My church friends sat in the front row, their faces grim with concern. Pastor Williams was there, his Bible clutched in his hands. Even Mrs. Johnson had come, though she'd been one of the first to believe Malcolm's lies. I walked into the courtroom feeling like I was walking into a war zone. Malcolm sat at the defense table, his face pale, his hand shaking. Denise sat beside him, her designer clothes looking out of place in the stark courtroom. She'd lost weight since the poisoning, her face gaunt, her eyes hollow. But when I looked at my son, really looked at him, I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. Pure, unadulterated fear. Because he knew what was coming. He knew the truth was about to be revealed. When I was called to testify, I walked to the stand with my head held high. I'd worn my best dress, the one I'd saved for special occasions, and I'd pinned Robert's wedding ring to my lapel. I was going to face my son as the woman I'd always been, strong, dignified, unbroken. Mrs. Clara Jean, the prosecutor said, "Can you tell the court what happened on the night of the incident?" I looked directly at Malcolm, my eyes meeting his for the first time in months. "My son and his wife tried to poison me," I said, my voice steady and clear. They'd been planning it for months, researching methods, consulting lawyers. They thought I was old, forgetful, weak. They thought I would just disappear quietly without a fight. The courtroom went silent. Even the judge leaned forward, his attention focused on my words. But they were wrong, I continued. I wasn't going to disappear. I wasn't going to let them erase me. I was going to fight back. As I told my story, the courtroom became a stage for my pain. I spoke about the sacrifices I'd made, the years I'd worked 2 jobs, the clothes I'd gone without so Malcolm could have more. I spoke about the house I'd built with Robert, the memories that lived in every corner, the life I'd created with my own hands. I gave you everything, I said, looking directly at Malcolm, and you tried to take my life. You tried to kill the woman who'd loved you unconditionally, who'd sacrificed everything for you, who'd given you the world. Malcolm's face crumpled. He'd been trying to maintain his composure, but my words were breaking him down, piece by piece. "Mom," he said, his voice trembling, "I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just confused. Denise said it would be easier for everyone if..." "Easier for everyone?" I interrupted, my voice sharp with pain. "Easier for everyone but me? Easier for everyone but the woman who'd given you everything." As my testimony continued, I could see the community's reaction changing. The people who'd doubted me, who'd believed Malcolm's lies, were now seeing the truth. They were seeing the woman I'd always been, strong, dignified, unbroken. Mrs. Johnson was crying, her face buried in her hands. Pastor Williams was nodding, his eyes filled with understanding. Even the judge was listening intently, his face grim with the weight of what he was hearing. Mrs. Clara Jean, the prosecutor said, "Is there anything else you'd like to say?" I looked around the courtroom, at the people who'd known me for decades, at the community that had once turned against me. "I was the backbone nobody noticed," I said, my voice steady and clear. "But I'm not invisible anymore. I'm not going to disappear quietly without a fight. I'm going to stand up for myself, for my life, for my dignity." When Malcolm took the stand, his testimony crumbled under the weight of his guilt. He'd been trying to maintain his innocence, but the evidence was overwhelming, and his own conscience was eating him alive. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just weak. Denise said it would be easier if you were gone, and I went along with it." His words hit the courtroom like a physical blow. A son, admitting he'd tried to kill his own mother. A man, confessing to the ultimate betrayal. "I was weak," he repeated, tears streaming down his face. "I was weak and I was wrong.
I'm sorry, Mom.
I'm so sorry." But sorry wasn't enough. Sorry couldn't undo what he'd done. Sorry couldn't bring back the trust he destroyed, the love he betrayed. The judge's verdict would change everything. Because when he read the decision, I realized that justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about redemption. When the judge read the verdict, I didn't feel triumph. I felt the weight of 71 years of love being thrown back in my face. But what happened next would shock everyone. The courtroom was silent as the judge read the verdict. Malcolm and Denise sat at the defense table, their faces pale with anticipation. I sat in the front row, Jordan's hand in mine, waiting for the words that would change everything. "Malcolm Jean," the judge said, his voice formal and grave, "you are found guilty of attempted murder, fraud, and elder abuse. Denise Jean, you are found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and fraud." The words hit the courtroom like a physical blow.
Guilty.
They were guilty. The son I'd raised, the boy I'd loved unconditionally, was guilty of trying to kill me. Malcolm's face crumpled. He'd been holding on to hope, praying for a miracle, but now he had to face the reality of what he'd done. Denise sat beside him, her designer clothes looking out of place in the stark courtroom, her face expressionless. But when I looked at my son, really looked at him, I saw something I'd never seen before. Regret.
Pure un adulterante de regret.
Because he knew what he'd lost. He knew what he'd destroyed. After the verdict was read, Malcolm turned to me, his eyes filled with tears. "Mom," he said, his voice trembling, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just weak. I was weak, and I was wrong." His words hit me like a physical blow. Because I'd waited for this moment, waited for him to acknowledge what he'd done, waited for him to show remorse. But now that it was here, I didn't feel triumph. I felt heartbreak. "Son," I said, my voice steady but filled with pain, "you didn't just hurt me. You destroyed everything we had. You destroyed the trust, the love, the family we'd built together." Malcolm's face crumpled. He'd been trying to maintain his composure, but my words were breaking him down, piece by piece. "I know," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I know I did, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But I can't undo what I did. I can't bring back what I destroyed." As the verdict was read, I could see the community's reaction changing. The people who doubted me, who'd believed Malcolm's lies, were now seeing the truth. They were seeing the woman I'd always been, strong, dignified, unbroken. Mrs. Johnson was crying, her face buried in her hands. Pastor Williams was nodding, his eyes filled with understanding. Even the judge was listening intently, his face grim with the weight of what he was hearing. "Mrs. Clara Jean," the judge said, "is there anything you'd like to say?" I looked around the courtroom, at the people who'd known me for decades, at the community that had once turned against me. "I was the backbone nobody noticed," I said, my voice steady and clear. "But I'm not invisible anymore. I'm not going to disappear quietly without a fight. I'm going to stand up for myself, for my life, for my dignity." When the judge announced the sentence, the courtroom went silent. Malcolm would serve 5 years in prison, Denise would serve 3. It wasn't the maximum sentence, but it was enough. Enough to send a message, enough to protect me, enough to bring justice. But as I listened to the sentence, I realized something that would change everything. This wasn't just about punishment. This was about redemption. This was about giving Malcolm a chance to become the man he should have been all along. "Malcolm," I said, looking directly at my son, "I'm not going to visit you in prison. I'm not going to write you letters or send you money. You need to face what you did, and you need to decide who you want to be." His face crumpled. He'd been hoping for forgiveness, hoping for reconciliation, but now he had to face the reality of what he'd done. "But," I continued, my voice steady, "if you can prove to me that you've changed, if you can show me that you're the man I raised you to be, then maybe, just maybe, we can rebuild what you destroyed." As I left the courthouse that day, I realized something that would change everything. I wasn't just fighting for justice. I was fighting for redemption. I was fighting for the chance to rebuild what had been destroyed. Jordan walked beside me, his hand in mine, and I knew that I wasn't alone. I had him, and he had me, and together we were going to build a new family, a new life, a new beginning. "Grandma," Jordan said, his voice filled with hope, "what happens now?" I looked at him, this brave boy who'd saved my life, and I smiled. "Now," I said, "we start over. We build something new, something better, something based on love instead of obligation." My new life was about to begin, because when I got home that day, I found something that would change everything. When I changed my will, I wasn't just protecting my assets, I was rewriting the story of my family forever. But what happened next would shock everyone. I sat in Attorney Johnson's office, surrounded by legal documents and family photos. The will I'd written 30 years ago, the one that had left everything to Malcolm, sat on the desk between us. It was time to rewrite my story, time to protect what I'd built. "Clara," Attorney Johnson said, his voice gentle but firm, "are you sure about this? Changing your will is a big decision, especially after everything that's happened." I looked at the photos on his desk, the memories of a life that was slipping away. "I'm sure," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not going to let them take what I've built. I'm not going to let them erase me." Attorney Johnson nodded, understanding the weight of what I was asking. "Then let's do this," he said. "Let's protect what you've built." As Attorney Johnson drafted the new will, I thought about all the times I'd sacrificed for my family, all the times I'd gone without so they could have more. I thought about the house I'd built with Robert, the memories that lived in every corner, the life I'd created with my own hands. "Everything goes to Jordan," I said, my voice steady and clear. "The house, the savings, the insurance policies. Everything." Attorney Johnson looked up from his paperwork. "Are you sure?" he asked. "What about Malcolm's other children? What about your other grandchildren?" I shook my head. Jordan was the only one who showed me love when the rest turned against me. He was the only one who protected me, who stood up for me, who saved my life. Attorney Johnson nodded, understanding the weight of what I was saying. "Then it's done," he said. "Jordan will inherit everything." When I told Jordan about the new will, His face lit up with surprise and gratitude. "Grandma," he said, his voice trembling, "you don't have to do this. I didn't help you because I wanted anything. I helped you because I love you." I took his hand, this brave boy who'd saved my life. "I know," I said, my voice steady. "But this isn't about money. This is about dignity. This is about showing the world that love matters more than obligation." Jordan's eyes filled with tears. "Grandma," he said, "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I said, smiling. "Just promise me that you'll use what I give you to build something good, something based on love instead of greed." When Malcolm's other children learned about the new will, they were furious. They'd expected to inherit something, expected to benefit from my death, but now they were getting nothing. "Grandma," Yvonne said, her voice sharp with anger, "this isn't fair. We're your family too. We deserve something." I looked at her, this daughter I'd raised, this woman who'd turned against me. "Fair," I said, my voice steady. "Fair would have been you standing up for me when Malcolm tried to kill me. Fair would have been you protecting me instead of abandoning me." Yvonne's face crumpled. She'd been hoping for reconciliation, hoping for forgiveness, but now she had to face the reality of what she'd done. "I'm sorry," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry I didn't protect you. I'm sorry I believed Malcolm's lies. I'm sorry I abandoned you when you needed me most." But sorry wasn't enough. Sorry couldn't undo what she'd done. Sorry couldn't bring back the trust she'd destroyed, the love she'd betrayed. As I left Attorney Johnson's office that day, I realized something that would change everything. I wasn't just protecting my assets. I was rewriting the story of my family. I was showing the world that love matters more than obligation, that dignity matters more than money. Jordan walked beside me, his hand in mine, and I knew that I wasn't alone. I had him, and he had me, and together we were going to build a new family, a new life, a new beginning. "Grandma," Jordan said, his voice filled with hope, "what happens now?" I looked at him, this brave boy who'd saved my life, and I smiled. "Now," I said, "we start over. We build something new, something better, something based on love instead of obligation." My new life was about to begin, because when I got home that day, I found something that would change everything. For the first time in 71 years, I was living for myself, and it felt like breathing again. But what happened next would shock everyone. 6 months after the trial, I was living a life I'd never imagined. I'd joined the community center, started volunteering with other elders, and discovered talents I never had time to explore. I was gardening, storytelling, and even learning to use a computer. "Clara," Mrs. Williams said, her voice filled with admiration, "you're a different woman. You're glowing. You're happy." I was happy. For the first time in decades, I was living for myself instead of for others. I was pursuing my own interests, building my own relationships, creating my own joy. But the best part was Jordan. He'd moved in with me, creating a new family dynamic that was based on love instead of obligation. We cooked together, gardened together, shared stories and dreams. He was the family I'd always wanted, the love I'd always deserved. The community had rallied around me, making me a local hero. People who'd once doubted me now came to me for advice, for wisdom, for strength. I'd become a symbol of resilience, a testament to the power of standing up for yourself. "Clara," Pastor Williams said, "your story has inspired so many people. You've shown them that it's never too late to fight for your dignity." I'd started speaking at the community center, sharing my story with other women who'd faced similar betrayals. I'd become an advocate for elder abuse awareness, using my experience to help others. "Grandma," Jordan said, You're helping so many people. You're making a difference. I was making a difference. I was using my pain to help others, turning my betrayal into something good, something meaningful. As my new life unfolded, I began to understand the true meaning of family. It wasn't about blood or obligation. It was about love, respect, and mutual support. Mrs. Johnson had become one of my closest friends, apologizing for doubting me and supporting me through everything. Pastor Williams had become a trusted advisor, helping me navigate my new role in the community. But the most important relationship was with Jordan. He wasn't just my grandson. He was my chosen family, my partner in this new life we were building together. "Grandma," he said one day, "I'm so proud of you. You've shown me what it means to be strong, what it means to fight for what you believe in." I discovered a new purpose in life, one that went beyond just surviving. I was helping other women, sharing my story, using my experience to make a difference in the world. Clara, a woman at the community center, said, "Your story gave me the courage to leave my abusive husband. You showed me that it's never too late to start over." I was changing lives one story at a time. I was showing women that they didn't have to accept abuse, that they didn't have to disappear quietly, that they could fight back. "Grandma," Jordan said, "you're a hero. You're helping so many people." I was a hero, not because I'd survived betrayal, but because I'd used that betrayal to help others. I'd turned my pain into purpose, my suffering into strength. As I looked around my new life, I realized something that would change everything. I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. I was living a life I'd never imagined, a life based on love instead of obligation, on joy instead of sacrifice. "Grandma," Jordan said, "what happens now?" I looked at him, this brave boy who'd saved my life, and I smiled. "Now," I said, "we keep building. We keep growing. We keep living this beautiful life we've created together." My new table was about to be set, because when I looked around my new life, I realized that the best was yet to come. When I set my table now, I look across at Jordan and whisper a prayer of thanks, not just for saving my life, but for teaching me what family really means. But what happened next would shock everyone. 1 year after the trial, I was setting my table for a special dinner. Not the old table, the one where I'd felt invisible, forgotten, erased. This was a new table, one I'd bought with my own money, one that represented the new life I'd built. Jordan sat across from me, his face beaming with pride. He'd grown so much in the past year, becoming the man I'd always known he could be. He was studying at the community college, working part-time, and helping me with the house. "Grandma," he said, "this is beautiful. This is everything we've built together." I looked around the room at the new furniture, the fresh paint, the memories we'd created together. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was a home, a place where love lived, where family was chosen, not forced. As we sat at our new table, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the fight for justice. The community that had rallied around me, the new relationships I'd built, the purpose I'd discovered. "Grandma," Jordan said, "do you ever think about what happened? Do you ever wonder if things could have been different?" I looked at him, this brave boy who'd saved my life. "I think about it every day," I said, my voice steady. "But I don't regret what happened, because it taught me what family really means. It taught me that love is a choice, not an obligation." Jordan nodded, understanding the weight of what I was saying. "You're right," he said. "Family isn't about blood. It's about love, respect, and mutual support." As we ate our dinner, I shared the wisdom I'd gained from my experience. "Jordan," I said, "never let anyone make you feel invisible. Never let anyone erase you. You are valuable. You are worthy. You are loved. Jordan's eyes filled with tears. Grandma, he said, you've taught me so much. You've shown me what it means to be strong, what it means to fight for what you believe in. I smiled, this brave boy who'd become my chosen family. And you've taught me what it means to be loved unconditionally, I said. You've shown me that family is about choice, not obligation. As our story spread through the community, I began to understand the full impact of what we'd accomplished. Other women were coming forward, sharing their own stories of betrayal and resilience. I'd become a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of standing up for yourself. Clara, a woman at the community center, said, "Your story gave me the courage to leave my abusive husband. You showed me that it's never too late to start over." I was changing lives one story at a time. I was showing women that they didn't have to accept abuse, that they didn't have to disappear quietly, that they could fight back. "Grandma," Jordan said, "you're a hero. You're helping so many people." I was a hero, not because I'd survived betrayal, but because I'd used that betrayal to help others. I'd turned my pain into purpose, my suffering into strength. As I looked around our new table, I realized something that would change everything. I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. I was living a life I'd never imagined, a life based on love instead of obligation, on joy instead of sacrifice. "Jordan," I said, looking at this brave boy who'd saved my life, "this is what family looks like. This is what love looks like. This is what dignity looks like." Jordan smiled, this chosen family member who'd become my everything. "Grandma," he said, "you're right. This is everything we've built together." They tried to erase me. Instead, I erased their power over me. And that, my friends, is what true family looks like. Love is a choice, not an obligation. Dignity is worth fighting for. And it's never too late to start over.